The American Civil War was one of the most consequential conflicts in world history. But, like many wars, it didn't have just one cause. So why did the Civil War start? Well, that depends on who you ask. But here are some possible answers. In a nutshell, the Civil War was caused by the expansion of slavery into Western territories, which created a lot of tension between slave states and free states. But that's just one possible answer to this question. In reality, the causes of the Civil War are complex and numerous. And before we get into them, a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you haven't already. When most people think about the causes of the Civil War, they often focus on slavery. And there is good reason for this. After all, the Confederacy specifically seceded over the issue of slavery, but focusing solely on slavery gives an incomplete picture of what caused the war. For example, prior to the Civil War, many people in the South believed in what was known as states' rights. This was the idea that states had the right to govern themselves, and that the federal government had limited authority over them. This way of thinking appealed to Southerners because it allowed them to maintain slavery even as the nation grew. You see, as the United States expanded westward, the question of whether slavery would be allowed in new territories became a major point of contention between the North and the South. The South wanted to expand slavery into these territories, while the North wanted to keep it out. This conflict over slavery led to a series of compromises, such as the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850, which temporarily eased tensions between the two sides. However, these compromises only postponed the inevitable. Meanwhile, other differences also grew between the North and the South. The two regions had different economic systems. The Northern economy was more industrial and commercial, while the Southern economy was primarily agricultural. This led to different interests and priorities between the two regions. Additionally, the North and South had different views on tariffs, internal improvements, and the role of the federal government in regulating the economy. These were issues that further divided the nation along geographic lines. Then there was the issue of slavery. While Southerners defended slavery as an institution that was necessary for their economic and social order, abolitionists in the North condemned it as a moral evil. This moral dimension to the slavery debate further inflamed passions and made compromise even more difficult. So while states' rights is often mentioned as a cause of the Civil War, it's important to remember that this was an issue on which Southerners had varying opinions. Many Southerners believed that states had the right to secede from the Union, while others argued that secession was illegal and unconstitutional. Ultimately, the issue of secession would be decided by the outcome of the war itself. Ultimately, all of these issues came to a head with the election of Abraham Lincoln. In 1860, Lincoln, who was opposed to the expansion of slavery, won a majority of the electoral votes without carrying a single Southern state. This demonstrated the growing divide between the two regions and convinced many Southerners that their way of life was under threat. As a result, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. When this happened, President Buchanan refused to recognize the Confederacy and argued that secession was illegal. However, he also took no action to prevent it. Instead, he let the Southern states secede and the Civil War began. Today, historians continue to debate the relative importance of these various causes. However, most agree that the issue of slavery was the most significant factor in causing the war. while states' rights and other issues played a role. It was ultimately the conflict over slavery that led to the Secession crisis and the outbreak of war. So why did the Civil War start? Because the United States, or at least the parts of it that would become the Confederacy, broke apart over the issue of slavery. Thank you for watching.